I'm attorney Howard Ankin, and I'm here today with Justice Howse. I have the opportunity of interviewing him in his quest to be a Supreme Court Justice this upcoming March 17th, 2020. Justice Howse, thanks very much for being here today, and I look forward to speaking with you.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Justice Howse, why is the primary even sometimes more important in the state of Illinois to vote than the general election in terms of judges' elections?
Well, in Cook County particularly, the primary is in effect the real election because that's where the outcome of the election is going to be decided. Because whoever wins the primary in March is going to be the winner in November, because there's very few Republicans in Cook County.
Justice Howse, I'm calling you Justice right now and not Judge. Why is that?
Well, as a technical matter, Judge is the correct term. Judge of the Illinois Appellate Court, Judge of the Supreme Court. But it's customary that judges who sit as appellate judges in various states be called Justice. And that's just customary.
You're currently a justice now.
Yes, I've been a judge on the appellate court for just over 10 years. And prior to that, I sat for 11 years on the trial court, the Circuit Court of Cook County.
And before that, you were a lawyer for 20 years yourself?
For 22 years, yes, I practiced law, focusing at the end on election law, civil rights, real estate tax matters. And I enjoyed that practice. I would practice with my dad, as a matter of fact.
Kind of like both of us are together in that. We both got to work with our fathers, which is a great honor.
It is. It absolutely is. It's a wonderful experience. Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your practice when you were in practice doing election law.
Well, how I started practicing in election law by working in the 6th Ward, representing candidates who were running for alderman and judge. And my really big case came in 1990 when the Harold Washington Party formed. The Harold Washington Party was a group of individuals who felt that they were not treated fairly by the Democratic Party. They didn't have an opportunity. So they wanted to form their own party and field their own candidates. So they started a new party, and they needed a lawyer to help them do that. And I was one of the lawyers they selected, and we represented the party. And as a consequence, we wound up winning a case in the Supreme Court, which allowed our candidates to be on the ballot. The Democratic Party was trying very vigorously to keep us off the ballot by challenging our petitions. But eventually we won, and we had a right to, our candidates had a right to run.
When you were on the circuit court bench, what kind of cases did you hear?
Well, and like most judges, initially I started in traffic court, then I went to where supplemental remedies. But eventually I wound up in the county division of the circuit court. And that division was where I wanted to go because, of course, one of the types of cases they heard was election cases.
And when you ran at the circuit court level, did you run from a certain community, or was that countywide?
That was also a countywide election. So this is my third time running countywide. So it's quite an experience. In Cook County, I never realized Cook County was so big.
You could cross the county. It takes you sometimes 2.5 hours to cross the county.
Absolutely. And
so you're used to the people of Cook County electing you to decide their cases.
That's right. That's one of the things that I focused on throughout my career, is to reach out to all communities, to be familiar with all communities, and to be open to all people.
Justice, for people that aren't familiar with your background, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. You know, I tell people that when you look at the two different judges and you're trying to pick one judge or another, one of the most important factors is perspective. And the reason I say that, in most cases, I would say 90% or more, if you have a good judge, two good lawyers on the other side of the case, the outcome of the case is going to be the same. You know, the evidence is going to be there. But there are about 10% of the cases, maybe a little less, where the outcome of the case is going to depend on how the judge sees things. And of course, how a judge sees things is the judge's perspective. And that perspective is formed by the judge's life experiences and the things that he's gone through throughout his life. And that's why I like to tell people about my background and my perspective that I'll be bringing to the Supreme Court. I think different perspectives on the Supreme Court not only gives people the idea that the decisions are made are valuable, but also I think it contributes to the quality of the decision when you have a perspective that's different that's brought to the court. I tell people that one of the things that I have a perspective for is looking out for the underdog, looking out for those who may not have as much power or are disadvantaged in our society. And the reason they ask me, well, how can you be such a sensitive person to the underdog? You're sitting on the appellate court, you're a judge before that, and you practice law with your dad. How could you be so sensitive to the underdog? And I tell people, well, I didn't start out that way. I started out in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. That's where I was born. 30 miles east of Nashville. And my mom and dad, they both had degrees from Tennessee State University. My dad had a master's degree. My mom had a teaching degree. And in that town, although my dad had a master's degree, the best job he could get was night shift as a janitor in a bomb factory. Although Brown versus Board of Education had been ruled upon, in the case that made discrimination in education unconstitutional, that decision had not been put into effect in Murfreesboro. So I started out in segregated schools. I remember being in Murfreesboro, we'd go to the movie theater with my family. We'd sit in the balcony. We'd look down. I'd ask my parents, why can't we sit down there? There's seats on the first floor, but the Jim Crow laws didn't allow that. So they wanted a better life for us. So in 1959, my family moved to Chicago. We became part of what they call the Great Migration. My dad initially worked for the post office, and then he worked for the city of Chicago. And while he worked full-time, and while he was working full-time, he decided that he wanted to be a lawyer. So he worked full-time, supporting the family during the day, and went to law school at night at John Marshall. My mom was a teacher. She worked with the Board of Education. She retired after working 35 years for them. But she worked very hard supporting the family while my dad did his thing with the law school and job. And that made an impression on me because it showed me how hard you had to work to fight up from being an underdog. It also showed me, I learned about how hard it is you have to work with people and how you have to sometimes forgive people for things. So I learned those lessons, and I actually brought those lessons with me of diligence and hard work. A couple of years ago, I was chair of what they call the Executive Committee of the Appellate Court. And those are a group of judges selected from each division who act as an administrative body for the court. When I became chair, I noticed there were a large number of cases which were sitting around waiting for decisions after all the arguments had been made, all the briefs had been submitted, and they're sitting there for 6 months or longer without a decision. And I decided that, this 6 months is too long. There are people who are waiting to see the outcomes of their cases. Are they going to be recompensated for injury? Are they going to be able to, is their conviction going to be overturned? And so I promulgated a rule that any judge who had a case that was sitting there waiting for decisions for 6 months or more had to write an explanation to the executive committee explaining why the case had not been completed and what steps were needed to finish that case. And as a consequence of that rule being passed, the number of cases sitting waiting for decisions for 6 months or more on the First District Appellate Court has been reduced to almost zero. We can't tell you about how we're going to rule on cases and what we're going to do on cases. Judges can't do that. But I can tell you about my perspective. And those tough decisions that will be coming up to the Supreme Court, if I'm there, they'll be viewed through the eyes of the person who has seen the things that I've just described to you.
What are you most proud of with your work on the Appellate Court?
The work that I'm most proud of on the Appellate Court is two things. Number one, I've only been reversed once in the last 6 years, which means I get my cases done correctly. And secondly, I have maintained a standard of diligence that I try to set for the whole court. And what I mean by that, each judge is assigned the same number of cases to write by a computer. And at the end of each quarter, they take an inventory as to how many cases are left on the judge's backlog. And the average judge has between 12 and 14 cases on backlog. I've led the court in the last 4 years in that I've had 0 cases, no backlog at all for the last 4 years.
Is your record for expediency and diligence that you have on the Appellate Court the same record that you have when you were in the Circuit Court?
Yes, I've had a reputation for being fair, getting work done quickly, and when I do my work, I had 2 mentors. One was Judge Pincham, and the other was my dad. And as I do my work, I do it quickly. I do it the best I can, and I imagine I have my father and Judge Pincham, who are now both now gone, deceased, watching over, and I want to work so they would be proud of the work that I do, and that's what I do every day.
Why personally do you feel that you want to be on the Illinois Supreme Court?
A few reasons. Number one, the most important job of the Supreme Court is to protect the civil rights of every person. And I think I'm the best person who can do that. I've seen a lot of things. I've been disadvantaged. I've seen my civil rights abused by law, which was the law of the land at the time. And I think I have a sensitivity, and I can bring that discussion to the table in deciding these important cases. The other thing that the job that the Supreme Court does is to shape the judiciary. According to our Illinois Constitution, whenever a vacancy occurs on the Circuit Court or Appellate Court, even the Supreme Court can fill that vacancy temporarily until the next election. And in general, a person who's appointed to the spot is considered to have a leg up on those who are running against that person in the next election. And so in that way, they shape the judiciary. When I was a lawyer for 22 years, I'm sure many people can relate to that. When I was going from courtroom to courtroom, most of the time I was sitting watching the judge work, waiting for my case to be called. And when I went around in those 22 years, I observed judges, and I observed what I thought was good judging and what I thought was bad judging. And I thought if I ever became a judge, I want to bring the good parts of that to the bench. And I think after all my experience, 43 years as a lawyer, over 20 years as a judge, I think I know what characteristics to look for in selecting a person, a lawyer, to become a judge and fulfilling that very important position of temporary appointments. And I think I can bring that to the bench and do it fairly. I encourage the listeners to pay attention to who's running for judge. The Bar Association put out their ratings. The media, the Sun-Times and the Chicago Tribune both put out their recommendations for judicial candidates. And I suggest that they study those lists and do the due diligence. Just voting for judge, whether Supreme or any other judge, looking for a pretty name, you can wind up with somebody with a pretty name who may be a pretty bad judge. So I recommend looking up those qualifications, looking up the backgrounds, and vote and take the care, because it's important to vote for judges, because most people don't realize this, but you're more likely to have an encounter with the judge than you are any of the other officers that are being voted upon at the election. They're going to be clerk of the circuit court election. It's going to be a state's attorney's election. But you're a presidential election. But you're not going to be able to interact with those people. You're more likely to interact with the judge before you interact with any one of those people. And the citizens have a right to select who's there.
For people that may not be aware, when you say the Alliance of Bar Associations, what is a bar association? What are some examples of the bar associations, Justice?
Well, the bar associations are groups of lawyers, of course, and they what they do, they interview candidates for judicial spots, and they, based on the criteria that they consider to be accurate for judges, they weigh and make an evaluation of whether that candidate is qualified, highly qualified, not qualified, or recommended, not recommended, and they make that determination. And they're generally seasoned lawyers who make those types of decisions.
And you're hoping to come back highly qualified from all those reviews.
Yes,
Justice?
I am. Thank you. Yes.
People can make a difference in the ballot box and in the jury box by just doing their civic duty.
That's correct. Yes, absolutely right. Yes.
Justice, what's the reason that you'd like to be Illinois Supreme Court Justice?
Well, I enjoy working. I enjoy helping people, and I think I can. One of the most important jobs of the Supreme Court is to protect the civil rights of every citizen, and they do that by deciding big cases which have a bearing on civil rights of many individuals. And I think I bring a perspective that is sensitive to the rights of those who are often being trampled upon, the underdogs in life, and I think that's important. In addition, I think one of the most important jobs is to shape the judiciary. The Constitution gives the Supreme Court the right to appoint vacancies. When someone retires or dies in office, the Supreme Court can appoint a temporary replacement. And I think I've had an opportunity in my 43 years to observe and learn and know what it takes to be a good judge, and I would do a good job at that, to select people fairly, qualified people who will be fair.
Justice Howse, it's been great talking to you here today.
My pleasure.
We've had an opportunity to talk to Justice Howse, and we look forward to seeing everybody at the polls March 17th.